Thanks, everyone, for joining us at the Project Censored radio show. We're very glad to welcome back on the program Dr. Richard Wolff, who's a professor of economics emeritus at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and a visiting professor in the graduate program in international affairs of the New School University in New York City. He's the founder of Democracy at Work and host of their nationally syndicated show, Economic Update. And his books include The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, Understanding Socialism, and Understanding Marxism. And you can find out more about him at democracyatwork.info. Dr. Wolff, thanks so much for joining us again.
Well, Eleanor, I am very glad and pleased and honored by your invitation to do so.
Well, likewise. And as in the past, I've invited you on because, in your own words, you are no cheerleader for capitalism.
Right.
And I want to dig into a few things that I think people are either concerned about or confused about, or perhaps both. As we stare down a second Trump term here, I wanted to first talk about tariffs and the suggestion or idea that using tariffs as a weapon pointed at what the state deems are enemies will actually inflict wounds on the American people rather than their supposed intended targets. Could you talk a little bit about this misunderstanding?
Yes, I'd be glad to. And it's important in its own right, but it's important because it is an example of a whole host of policies and statements by Mr. Trump and his people that are really more distractions from a problem than they are addressing it, let alone solving it. So keep that kind of in mind. It's a theme running through it all. And tariffs is a perfect example. Let's begin basically. What is a tariff? It is a tax. That's all it is. It's a tax. It's a tax on a particular thing. Usually in the English language, we put the particular thing that the tax affects as an adjective in front of the word tax. So we have an income tax, a sales tax, a wealth tax. Now, we used to call these things we're talking about import duties. The word duties is another word for tax. So you can think of it, it used to be called an import tax, and instead we call it now a tariff. That has a long historical explanation, but nobody should be mystified or fooled. It's a tax. So when you notice that Mr. Trump and the Republican Party are gung-ho to jack up and apply broadly the tariff, here's what you're watching. A political party, the Republicans, who for over a century marketed themselves to us as the great party opposing taxes, is now the champion of lots and lots of taxes. That's the truth. They won't say that. They need to talk about tariffs in the hope that Americans won't know or remember what this means and how much it tells you about the Republican Party and the degree to which you can or should believe its promises. Second, the tariff is a tax on Americans, not on other people. It is a tax on those Americans who import anything. So if you buy French wine or you buy Japanese electronic gizmos or you fill in the blank, you buy a car made in Mexico or Canada or elsewhere, then you're going to have to pay the price that the producer of that good charges, plus, let me underscore that, plus the tax on it, the tariff. So your price as an American business or your price as an American citizen will be the cost of the object to the producer, plus the tariff tax you pay Uncle Sam. So not only is the Republican Party gung-ho for taxes, it's gung-ho for taxes that will be paid by Americans to the American government. The number of people I talk to who do not understand those basic economics is large. And I've learned long ago not to embarrass any audience I address by asking for a raising of hands of those who are familiar with this. Either people keep their hands down or they raise their hands and then show me 10 minutes later that they should have kept their hands down. All right, so now let's go. What is Mr. Trump doing? Acting, by the way, he has said it many times. He has said the tariffs are our hitting the Chinese for whatever it is he accuses them. Or nowadays, the Canadians and the Mexicans, blaming them, notice, for the drug trade, as if the United States is not the fundamental reason there is a drug trade, since we consume more of them than any other country, right? In order not to face that problem, he demonizes somebody else. A theme in everything he does. There's always the enemy, the bad guys are over there, foreigners. That's why the immigrants are an invasion. That's why we're going to have to smite the bad guys abroad. We're going to put America first, as if the previous governments put Ecuador first. I mean, the nonsense is stupefying, but let's stay with it. What happens when you put a tariff on something? Well, the first thing that happens, if the United States does it, is that the price of everything that is having to pay a tariff goes up, which means that if Mr. Trump actually carries through the tariffs he has spoken about and committed himself to, it will be a major problem of a rising inflation rate. And that's kind of bizarre when you think that the inflation is probably the single most important thing that got most Americans to vote for the man, because they were angry about the inflation of the last 3 or 4 years, quite rightly so, were hurt by it, which indeed they were, and wanted to do something. Voting for Donald Trump, it turns out, probably not the smart way to respond to all of that, and nothing shows it more than tariffs. It means, I'll give you a concrete example. Mr. Biden, who was hitting companies with tariffs already and countries, is perhaps most famous for taking the 27% tariff that Trump had put on Chinese electric vehicles, Chinese electric trucks, and Chinese electric cars. Just a word of explanation. I don't want to take too much time. 10 or 15 years ago, every car company in America started working on the electric car because they could see it was the wave of the future. That's why Mr. Tesla is a rich man, et cetera, et cetera. The company that won that competition, that ended up producing the best quality, lowest price electric vehicles, is a company I would guess most people listening to us and watching us never heard of. It's the BYD Corporation. 3 letters: B boy, Y yellow, D dog. BYD. They are the ones. If you go to Europe today, you will see BYD electric cars and trucks all over the place. If you go across the United States, you won't see any. Why is that? Answer: tariff. The 27% tariff means that even though that's the cheapest, best quality truck or car, the one most companies would want to buy as an input to their business, the one most of us would want to buy as the best deal we can get, we used to have to pay not only the price of it, but an extra 27% to Uncle Sam as a tariff. Well, Mr. Biden raised it to 100%. Here's what that means. He did that months ago. So, for example, a $30,000 vehicle, electric vehicle from BYD, and there are many other companies in China that make electric vehicles. I'm just picking BYD because it's the most successful so far. let's say $30,000. Okay, if you were an American and you wanted to buy it, you would have to go to the store, pay $30,000 to get the car shipped, but to be released by your dealer to you, you'd have to pay another 100%, another $30,000, which your car dealer takes from you and sends to Washington for Mr. Trump. Okay, that means the car to you costs 60,000. But the car, if let's say you're a little American company and you're buying electric trucks to do your business, you're competing with someone, I'll pick a place, Italy, an Italian company, or a Swedish company, or it doesn't matter. They can buy and are buying BYD trucks. Why? Because they're the best and they're cheapest. They're getting them for 30,000. You American, you can't. You either get that $60,000 car, which you don't want, or you go to a less good car made by a non-Chinese company, you know, a Tesla or a GM or a Ford, the kind of truck you normally would buy. And what do you pay? Well, they charge more. They charge 40, 50 grand. Why? Because they know you can't buy the 60,000. You wouldn't because it's stupid. So you end up buying an inferior product at a higher price than your competitor pays. You know what that means in the long run? Your competitor is going to beat you. So here is Mr. Trump Tariff promising to make America strong and doing exactly the opposite, diminishing the competitive capacity of American located companies. Because remember, you pay the tariff whether you're a U.S. owned business in the U.S. or a foreign owned business in the U.S. So when the dust clears, if you have an economist explaining this, and it isn't very complicated, Mr. Trump is aggrandizing his theater, America first, tough guy, anti-foreign, by undercutting the competitiveness of the United States, which is in trouble already because it can't compete in the rest of the world the way it once did, is already losing mostly to China. This is therefore an assist to them. You can be sure that the economists who are Chinese, every bit as well trained as we are here in America, are explaining this to the Chinese politicians who are having a wonderful laugh at the absurd spectacle of it all.
Yeah, it really just sounds like we're shooting ourselves in the foot, and
Yeah.
the rest of the world gets a front row seat to that. And I wanted to talk about that anti-foreign aspect a little bit more because you've also talked about on your program in the past about how this kind of dog whistle against immigration is actually a very economic perspective. It doesn't speak to the truth of the economy, whereas you said that absorbing immigrants into the economy is actually the sign of a healthy economy, not the reverse. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Let me begin by underscoring how, again, Mr. Trump and the choreographers and playwrights that he has gathered around him, they are telling a story of holding back an invasion. They are telling a story of demonizing these desperately poor families who have ripped themselves out of their religion, out of their community, out of their language, out of their culture, out of their diet to come here to a strange country where they don't know what. I mean, I won't go into all of that, but the Trump theater make these people bad and make it good for America to kick them out. So we're going to deport millions, or at least he says so. Oh, here again, here we go. Let's do the economics. The United States, over the last 2 centuries, did indeed become a great economic powerhouse. It isn't what it once was, but it's still an economic powerhouse. And how did that happen? Well, one key variable, which everybody who studies this agrees to, is that it absorbed wave after wave of immigrants. After all, we have the dubious distinction of having killed the indigenous people here, right? We performed ethnical cleansing. We performed mass murder. We can we celebrate it. We have cowboy movies that make it all seem perfectly good, but we all know, we really do all know what we did. We killed them off. All right. Then the economy that became great was overwhelmingly a white dominated economy. There were black people brought against their will. We know that story, but we are predominantly a white country. And that white country is nothing other than an accumulated set of waves of immigrants. The British, then the Irish, then the Germans, then the Italians, and the Scandinavians, and on and on and on. That's what we were. And let's look at what that meant. I would argue, number one, as most people do, that this immigration was an enormous subsidy to American capitalism. Let me explain. Most of the people who come are working age adults. Let's call that people 16 years of age or older and up to 40, 45 years of age. Yes, there were some children, of course, and there were some elderly, of course. But the core are these young adults who want to, and who typically do, come off the boat and go get a job to survive. Okay, now let's look. For an adult to do a job, he or she has to have been fed, clothed, sheltered, and educated for 15, 16 years. In our society, we as a nation accept the cost of all of that because we're getting an adult worker who will be productive in his or her job. An immigrant does the country they go to an enormous favor. Ireland paid for the growth of that young woman, age 19, who comes here and starts a life in the garment district, sewing clothes, or working in a restaurant, or any factory, whatever you want. This is fantastic. The United States gets the benefit of her labor and her productivity, but has none of the cost of getting her to the point where she can be productive in a job. This is a fantastic subsidy. It means the United States says, come in here. And then what does it typically do? It says to the immigrant, and it did this always, okay, you're the last one to arrive. You're the new immigrants. So we're going to give you the crappiest jobs at the lowest pay, stick you in the worst housing, and give you the poorest schools, medical care, and public services. But we hold out the following. If you work hard and do all of this, the next wave of immigrants will replace you. You can move up. You can you can get the better job. You can go to school. We pride ourselves as a nation of having an exemplary economic mobility. People can rise. You can promise Americans you will get the American dream if you work hard, keep your nose to the grindstone, etc. And you know, there was a grain of truth to that. Never matched the hype, but it was a grain of truth. But the only reason there was a grain of truth was because of the immigrants. So the immigrants subsidized America because they made it believable. You could accept that role. And you know who they told the story to? The immigrants right behind them. Look at us. We used to live in this horrible slum. Now we live in a comfortable suburb. We used to depend on public transportation. Now we've got this jalopy, and on and on and on. So it was very, very important, tremendous benefit. And America grew strong on its immigrants and this way of bringing them in and moving up. Now, of course, to do that, you had to have enough jobs. This doesn't work if you don't have enough growth to say to the immigrant, come in. Yes, it's the worst job. Yes, it pays crap, but it's better than what you got there in Norway or what you got there in Czechoslovakia or wherever, which was true. And so it worked out. The United States is now at a place, and this is the most important point, where it can't do that anymore. That's not Mr. Trump's fault, not Mr. Biden's fault. What they're doing wrong is refusing to face any of this, refusing to say it, refusing to go to the American people and tell them. Instead, they give us real phony theater. And this is a perfect example. We're holding back the invasion. No, you're not. You're too weak an economy to absorb them the way you always did. That's the truth of it. You're not growing. And you're not growing because the world economy is now dominated by other economies that are growing, like the Chinese and the Indian and the Brazilian. They are eating your lunch as a society. You don't get it. You don't want to face it. You need to pretend that you're the king and all that you need is a politician who puts you first. That is junk. It is crappy theatrical junk. It has only one function, to distract you. Our problem is we are not going to be great again the way Mr. Trump's red hat suggests. You know why? Because we're not admitting, we're not integrating, we're not absorbing the waves of immigrants that still want to come here. We're not able to do what made us great, kicking out the people who've already actually come here and tried to live the life that immigrants once had here are now going to be kicked out, and others are going to be blocked from coming in. Now, that's a serious sign of economic decline. And the only thing our politicians, and I'm afraid I have to mention the Democrats every bit as much as the Republicans, they don't have the courage, they don't have the decency, the honesty to talk about it. So they come up with these theaters. We're going to fight the Russians in Ukraine. What? And we're going to fight the Chinese. Stop. You've been talking like that for 25 years. You know what happened in those 25 years? The Chinese didn't change their economy one whit. They didn't move closer to you one whit. And you know what happened? They caught up to you. The Chinese, let me summarize it this way. The Chinese economy, the most dynamic in the world right now, has gathered around it allies, just like the United States gathered around itself allies. The allies of the United States are called the Group of Seven. It's the United States, Japan, Canada, Britain, France, Italy, and Germany. Those are the seven. China has something it calls the BRICS, BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, to which a bunch of other countries have now added themselves. If you add up the US and its allies, G7, with China and its allies, the BRICS, the allies of the BRICS and China is about between 55 and 60% of the people on this planet. The United States population is 4.5% of the people. You know what? That number, that difference dwarfs everything else. But in case you want to be an economist with me, we measure the size, the power of an economy by something called the GDP, gross domestic product. It's a rough measure of the output of goods and services in one calendar year in a country. Okay? The United States is the biggest GDP in the world. Second biggest, People's Republic of China. But now let's compare the G7, adding up all the GDPs of those 7 countries and all the GDPs of the now 22 countries that are in the BRICS. The BRICS, let's get ready. I know this is going to hurt. The BRICS output is much larger than that of the G7. The BRICS themselves are about 35% of the total output of goods and services produced on this planet, whereas the G7 is about 27%, not even close. And the gap gets wider. This year, when you've heard Mr. Trump and everybody say over and over again, we're the strongest economy, the International Monetary Fund, a very pro-Western institution, explains that the United States will grow in the year 2024, just over 2.7, maybe 2.8%. Every one of the other G7 countries will do less well than that. Germany is not only not growing that fast, Germany is declining. Germany is a recession pulling down Europe, which ought to be a wake-up call, because Germany used to carry Europe. Now it is dragging Europe down. But we're told the United States doing better than any other. It's true. 2.8% is better than the others. What's left out of the article or Mr. Trump's speech is that China this year will grow 5%, almost double. India will grow 7%. Those are the 2 biggest economies in the BRICS, which means the gap is getting bigger and bigger. It's over. The American empire is over, and the dominance of American capitalism. And one of the signs is what we are doing in a cruel and heartless way to the immigrants. Not because we like being cruel and heartless, well, some of us do, but mostly we don't. It's really about we can't. We can only bring them in if we substitute them for Americans who are native born and who are rebelling against it, frightened by the prospect. And who could blame them? They too feel it, even though they dare not say it, that the economy is in trouble. And they don't want to see their government helping foreigners. They want the help they can get for themselves. So that's a chance for right-wing demagogues to come in there and play with all of that. But the economics, it is a screaming sign of a weakening U.S. capitalism. And only the BS blocks that from the view of Americans who are thinking about this.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it just goes to show you, like we say on this show quite frequently, we are the most propagandized people on the planet, and
Yeah.
people would do well to listen to your program, Economic Update. And of course, every time you're on the show here, we greatly appreciate it. We've run out of time for this episode, but I want to remind folks that you can check out all of Professor Wolff's work over at democracyatwork.info. Dr. Wolff, thank you as always for coming on the show and taking all of this stuff, which me, as an economic idiot, wouldn't understand otherwise, and making it so easy to process. Really
Good.
appreciate it.
I'm very glad, and I appreciate the opportunity to bring this to the public. That I share your perspective that you just mentioned. I shake my head in disbelief at the disconnect between what is going on and the denial and fantasy that we call politics, which is just this effort to keep your head stuck in the sand because you can't dare face what's up there in the world you actually live in.
Yes, it's crazy. It's a crazy time to be alive in this final episode of this final season of America, as I like to call it. Uh, Professor Wolff, thank you again so much for taking the time.
My pleasure. Thank you.